Welcome back to another What If episode. Today we are going to be looking at an alternate history where DC had to sell off their characters to avoid bankruptcy and not Marvel. I don't want to get into semantics about all this because that's not what you guys are here for, but I will still give a rough history. The best way I can see this working in terms of the time frame, since DC did consider selling off their characters in, I believe, the 70s, was two major events and erasing them from history. First would be that Batman was never released and the death of Superman was never made, because those were the biggest things to happen to DC in quick succession. And while I wouldn't say that would eventually lead to their bankruptcy like Marvel in the 90s or anything like that, it wouldn't give them the extra boost they needed around the time, so they would license off their characters. Meanwhile, for Marvel, maybe Howard the Duck was an actual success along with Captain America. Best I could think of in that regard. But let's get done with that part and lead to the stuff that people actually care about, the movies and TV shows. Obviously, this part will take care of the Fox stuff, since that came first, and the next part will take care of the Sony stuff along with the weird stuff with Universal. Now, when it comes to the X-Men, the literal counterpart would be the Doom Patrol, and I don't think DC would sell them off because they simply aren't popular enough and would be too weird for a big modern audience. Meanwhile, Justice League would be way too big to sell off, and I don't think they would ever do that. So we want something in the wheelhouse of X-Men where they are popular, can hold their own franchise with enough characters, but not be something like Justice League. With that, I thought of the Justice Society. Now, is this the best decision? Maybe, maybe not. But I felt like it was a good idea. Plus, it would be amusing to try and modernize it for contemporary audiences, like with the black leather and all that shit. Plus, it adds into the next group of characters I'm doing with Fantastic Four, who is also owned by Fox, since Fantastic Four is more old-timey and campy like Justice Society can be. However, for their counterpart, I decided to go with the Legion of Superheroes, because they have that major Silver Age vibe that Fantastic Four has. Even if they have way more characters, we can stick with the original team. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So, those are what Fox has in terms of DC characters. The Justice Society and the Legion of Superheroes. I'm also going to be doing counterpart movies like last time because it's a little bit easier and it does kind of follow the same rules as the counterpart series in a way, even though this is not the same universe. But I still think it worked for what I had in mind. However, if you guys want me to do a more free-for-all universe, then let me know in the comments below and I can do that at some point. First is the X-Men counterpart with JSA in 2000. Rather self-explanatory with this one, as I already mentioned what X-Men will be, so let's move on to casting. It's not going to be as self-explanatory as my previous What If, because that was all about finding exact counterparts to certain characters. Here, I'm doing counterparts to certain characters so I can personally attribute them to certain movies for my own sake. Very rarely do characters have anything in common with their JSA counterparts, but enough dilly-dallying, let's get into our cast of characters. So, our X-Men consisted of Wolverine, Professor X, Jean Grey, Cyclops, Storm, Rogue, and kinda sorta Iceman. For our Justice Society, I decided on Wildcat, because it's one of the few cases where the counterparts actually match. Wildcat and Wolverine are very much two peas in a pod, and with that, both would be played by Hugh Jackman. Then the next character would be Hawkman, as both he and Professor X are the leader of their respective groups, and he would be played by Dennis Quaid. Then Black Canary, the Dinah Drake version, obviously, is a strong female character, much like Jean Grey. She would be played by Famke Janssen. Then I would have Green Lantern, the Alan Scott version, obviously. And like Cyclops, their powers are focused on some sort of light and beams. Again, as I said, it's very loose here. And I honestly thought Bruce Davison would be perfect as Alan Scott. He has the look and vibe for it, most definitely. Then Dr. Midnight would be played by James Marsden, Johnny Thunder would be played by Shawn Ashmore, and Sandman would be played by Sam Neill. Then, obviously, the villains would be the Justice Society, much like the Brotherhood of Mutants in the actual film. We would have Wizard, played by Ian McKellen, Perdegaton, played by Charles Dance, the Gambler, played by Elliot Gould, Brainwave, played by Patrick Stewart, and then finally the Thinker, played by Sam Waterston. I like the idea that the Injustice Society, maybe not named, has been causing chaos for a lot longer than the JSA has been saving people. I just thought that was interesting. So it's relatively simplistic. JSA versus ISA. That's all there is to it. Now we have the very stupidly titled yet excellent film X2, X-Men United, which becomes JSA Infinity in 2003. Another simple one, it gets a sequel. This will be it for the first 3 films, but once we start getting spin-offs, I can get into more thorough explanations. And with that, let's move on to casting. So, everyone returns from the previous film. Wildcat, Hawkman, Black Canary, who doesn't die here, Green Lantern, Dr. Midnight, Johnny Thunder, and Sandman. Then for our Nightcrawler quote-unquote counterpart would simply be Mr. Terrific, the Terry Sloan version, also played by Alan Cumming. Nothing is similar, I just wanted to use this character and I think Alan Cumming could do it, most definitely. Since Nightcrawler is a very devout character, and Sloan kind of follows into that, but rather than a religion, it's more of a doctrine with his fair play banner. Then for additional ISA members, I would include Icicle, the Jor McKent version, played by Peter Stormare. Opposite of Fire character Pyro would be Ice character in Icicle. Boom. It works. Then Lady Deathstrike, a character I thought fit would be Huntress, the Paula Brooks version, played by Kelly Hu, because both are great fighters and kind of feral characters. In addition to the Wizard, Perdegaton, Brainwave, the Gambler, and the Thinker returning. Then I thought the villain that would kind of fit into the past of another character, this time with Hawkman, I thought I would go with Vandal Savage as the William Stryker counterpart, played by Antonio Banderas. Both are essentially immortal characters, so I thought we could have them fighting a long time and whatnot. So that would essentially be it for the sequel. Before we get into the last Tridge X-Men film, we shall take a detour with our Fantastic Four counterpart with Legion of Superheroes in 2005. This one would be a little bit different because the whole cast would have to change, so they would have to be much younger. So nobody would be the same, but they could have similar vibes to certain characters. Even though the original team was 3 characters, I wanted to add a 4th to make it proper with the Fantastic Four idea. So the first 3 would be easy. Cosmic Boy, who would be played by Wes Bentley, Saturn Girl, played by Jennifer Morrison, and Lightning Lad, played by Jake Gyllenhaal. They would be young enough to pass for like late teens or maybe early young adults, but old enough so that they could handle stunts and shit like that. Cosmic Boy kind of fits in with the leader part of the group, like Mr. Fantastic. Saturn Girl is the only female who is blonde, much like Invisible Woman. And then Lightning Lad is a character that can be kind of jokey, but also has powers kind of based around heat. I mean, electricity can be, hot as fuck. Then, for the kind of sort of thing counterpart, I went with Chameleon Boy, played by Alan Ritchson, because he is a weirder looking character like the Thing, but can also shapeshift, and I thought that worked. Then, finally for the villain, I think that Mordru was kind of perfect, as he was a sorcerer, just like Dr. Doom in the comics, only to be sanitized here, just like Doom was in the 2005 film. He would still be played by Julian McMahon. Since the Legion doesn't have to worry about getting their powers or anything since they were born with them, we don't have to worry about that part of the origin, just forming the team and then stopping Mordru. Now finally, we get to the final film of the original X-Men trilogy, X-Men The Last Stand, which now becomes JSA Ultra in 2006. We have the final movie of the Tridge, which doesn't really need much explanation. So, for any additional members, we have Red Tornado, played by Daniel Cudmore, and the Atom, the original Al Pratt version, played by Steve Zahn. For the villain, I decided to kind of combine the Cure storyline with the alternate personality storyline into one, sort of. With that, I decided on Ultra Humanite, who would be played and voiced by Brian Cox. He develops a way to get rid of superpowers, but there is also some body swapping. It would mostly be just Brian Cox in his human form, and he doesn't become the albino gorilla until the climax. Then for Juggernaut, I thought a perfect character for him would be Sportsmaster, played by Vinnie Jones. The other JSA and ISA members would return to their roles. Now we have the Fantastic Four sequel, Fantastic Four, Rise of the Silver Surfer, which now becomes Legion of Superheroes, Rise of the Time Trapper, in 2007. Even though there isn't really a tag team villain duo like Galactus and the Silver Surfer, I think the ones I managed to incorporate still worked. However, with this, I'm going to be adding another person to the Legion of Superheroes, with that being Brainiac 5, who would be played by Frankie Muniz. He had a tendency to play smart characters, and he was at the height of his career at this point. Plus, the character of Brainiac 5 would add to the overall story and villain, who would be Computo, voiced by Lawrence Fishburne. He's trying to wipe out all of humanity across the universe, but is from the future. This is where the time trapper comes in. He would be played by a stunt actor, maybe Doug Jones, since he played the Silver Surfer in the film, and he would be voiced by Wes Bentley, but with some sort of like distortion or reverb or something like that, so you can't tell it's him. Because even though the character is a mystery, it's been alluded to that he is Cosmic Boy from the future, at least one of the many versions, so he could come back in time to stop the Legion, specifically Brainiac 5, to stop them from making Computo so that he doesn't destroy the universe. However, they stop him and either kill him or imprison him. Probably imprison him, so, it fits into the whole vibe of Legion of Superheroes, because I don't think they kill anybody. And throughout the film, it's only vaguely implied about who he is, only to maybe reveal it at the very end or not reveal it at all. Obviously, the Legion stops Computo before he can destroy Earth. The end showcases Brainiac 5 starting to make the machine, making history an endless loop. Next, we have our prequel movie featuring a beloved character, and I decided to make it Hawkman Secret Files in 2009. Now, when I was trying to think of a character who I thought would work for a prequel set of movies, I thought of Hawkman, because he's probably the most popular Justice Society member, mainly because of the Thanagarian portrayal, even though that wouldn't be the case here. He would be the Golden Age version. I just thought of that opening with Wolverine and Sabretooth through the different wars, and I thought Hawkman would fit perfectly with that since he keeps getting reincarnated. So you would have that similar montage of like going through wars, but it would just be all of his lives and, with him dying instead of just, living through history. This would take place in the 1920s rather than the 1970s like in the actual film, to make it clear that this is two different incarnations of the same character. We would see various incarnations that were canon at this point, outside of the Thanagarian version of course, throughout the centuries from his first death back in ancient Egypt, as I mentioned. He would be joined by Hawkwoman, played by Renee Russo in this time period. I am aware that Hawkwoman and Hawkgirl are technically two separate characters, but I feel like with this, modernizing stuff and, being progressive, they'd be like, oh, Hawkgirl is kind of, oh, why is she a girl but he's a man type of thing. So, that's what I'm aiming for. That's what I think would happen. So anyway, he would be a detective named James Wright, and she would be his wife, Sheila Carr. This would be his first meeting with Vandal Savage, still played by Antonio Banderas. It would be more of a noir mystery, and the film would end with them stopping Vandal Savage's plot, but realizing they need more heroes to stop men like him, but they get killed before they can properly make the idea a reality. The movie would end with them wondering who they will reincarnate as next. The next one is the prequel film with the X-Men First Class counterpart, Justice Society All-Star, in 2011. So this would be a prequel film taking place before the events of the original trilogy. Younger people would be cast, as well as having entirely different characters at the forefront. This film would take place in the 1980s, maybe late 1970s, because the timeline would make a bit more sense that way. Firstly, we have a Hawkman, this time played by Daniel Gillies. Wizard would be played by Michael Fassbender, who wouldn't be friends with Hawkman like what the Professor X and Magneto relationship is, but they just wouldn't be formal enemies yet. Same with Brainwave, played by James McAvoy, but both of them have been villains for a while. They would essentially be characters kinda in the background, realizing who they are destined to be as part of the ISA, sometimes crossing paths with the JSA and the main villains, but we'll get to that in a second. Then for the Justice Society, we have Hourman, played by Nicholas Hoult, Spectre, played by Caleb Landry Jones, Starman, played by Lucas Till, Huntress, the Helena Wayne version, played by Jennifer Lawrence, and Hawkwoman, played by Rose Byrne. The villains this time around would be the Secret Society of Supervillains, led by Wotan, played by Kevin Bacon. For the people under him, they would be Mist, played by Jason Fleming, Killer Frost, the Crystal Frost version, played by January Jones, felt it was pretty obvious, Ragdoll, played by Doug Jones, and Signal Man, played by Eddie Gathegi. It would be about them duking it out in the backdrop of the 1980s. At a point during the film, Wizard and Brainwave would join the Secret Society of Supervillains after an encounter with the Justice Society. It would eventually end with them defeating the Secret Society of Supervillains, but Wizard and Brainwave escaping, realizing the mistakes of the group, and starting their own villainous group. The next Hawkman film would be The Return of Hawkman in 2013. This would be a sequel that would take place after the events of JSA Ultra and lead into the next film. This film would have Rene Russo coming back as the next incarnation of Hawkwoman, who was previously seen in All-Star, played by Byrne, but she had a falling out with Hawkman, hence why she never appeared in the previous films, as well as doubting her destiny with Hawkman. The main villain would be Hawkset, played by Oscar Isaac. The film would showcase the backstory between the three of them getting murdered by Hawkset with an nth metal dagger, thus them getting reincarnated across time. It's a more personal story, much like the film it is based on. It eventually results in them killing Hawkset, but knowing he will be back in another life. The film would then tease that a greater threat is coming for the next film. The next film, which is a counterpart to X-Men Days of Future Past, is JSA 2030 in 2014. I thought this was going to be tough because the JSA didn't really have something so specific in regards to Days of Future Past. But then there was something, at least a little similar, a crossover with the JLA called DC 2000. Obviously, necessary changes would have to happen due to not being able to use the JLA and such, but let's get into specifics. So the film would involve a bunch of the future team going back in time to stop T.O. Morrow, much like in the actual comic, and they have to convince their past selves to help them rather than the JLA convincing the Justice Society, for obvious reasons. They would have to team up with Wizard and Brainwave because their existence is also threatened. The people that would go back in time are Hawkman, now played by both Gillies and Quaid, Wizard, played by both Fassbender and McKellen, Brainwave, played by both McAvoy and Stewart, Hawkwoman, played by both Byrne and Russo, Wildcat, Red Tornado, and Sandman. The people that would only stay in the future are Dr. Midnight, Dr. Fate, played by Josh Hellman, Amazing Man, played by Mike Coulter, the Rick Tyler Hourman, played by Taron Egerton, Adam Smasher, played by Andre Tricoteau, and the Michael Holt Mr. Terrific, played by Omar Sy. The characters that would be in the past are Hourman, obviously the Rex Tyler version, the Jay Garrick Flash, played by Grant Gustin, and T.O. Morrow, played by Peter Dinklage. As I said, it would involve some of the team going back to stop T.O. Morrow, who is now an immortal ruler of the world in the year 2030. He sent future technology back in time to the mid-century where the JSA intend to use it to help the world, but it would just fast-track his domination. The current team go back in time while the newer recruits stay back and help stop Morrow in the present. It would end with the JSA stopping the threat of Morrow in the past, which causes Red Tornado to never be made, but he makes the willing sacrifice to ensure the future. They all disappear from the past, and the future shows that dead members are now alive, like Black Canary, Atom, Green Lantern, Johnny Thunder, and others, and that the future is okay. I didn't mention that before, but yes, similar to Days of Future Past, you do have a bunch of well-known JSA members be dead. Just wanted to mention that here. However, since the past JSA are the only ones that remember Red Tornado, they put up a memorial to him as the JSA member that never existed. Alright, next one is going to be a fun one. For Fantastic Four, or as many naysayers like to call it, Fant4stick, we would have The Legion in 2015. So this would essentially be the super dark and gritty version of the Legion of Superheroes, just like Fant4stick was for Fantastic Four. This is gonna be interesting. Honestly, I think the main cast kind of works for their respective characters, mainly since it's supposed to be dark and serious now. So they would be aged up and have big grown-up names since this is so serious now. So instead of Cosmic Boy, we would be using his later name, Polestar, and he would be played by Miles Teller. Then we would have Saturn Woman, played by Kate Mara. Since she didn't have another name, might as well call her Woman and not Girl, right? Then we would have Lightning, played by Michael B. Jordan instead of Lightning Lad. And then Chameleon, played by Jamie Bell instead of Chameleon Boy. The villain would be Mordru again, played by Toby Kebbell. This would also probably take place in a more dystopian version of the future to add to the vibe that the original film gives off. But not a ton to it, just a shitty, dark, and grounded version of the Legion of Superheroes. That would suck, because they made something that isn't dark and gritty, because Josh Trank is a moron. Anyway, on to the Deadpool counterpart, and I decided on Jack Knight Starman in 2016. I thought it would be really funny to have a character that is essentially the complete opposite of Deadpool, a stubborn asshole versus a jokester who doesn't take anything seriously. But they do share a commonality. Neither wants to be a hero. Plus, my friend adores this character to no end, so I thought I would include it for him. The main plot is going to be revenge like in the actual film, but instead of fucking up his face like in Deadpool, Jack is getting revenge for the death of his brother, which forces him to be the next Starman, even though he really does not want to be. So the main villain would be the Mist for the majority of the film, as that is who Jack believes killed his brother, until it is revealed it was the Mist's son who has the same powers as he does. He ends up killing them both and burying his father's/brother's Starman outfit. He decides to keep being Starman just for a little bit longer. Jack Knight would be played by Ed Skrein. For the character of Colossus, I thought a perfect candidate for that counterpart would be Atom Smasher, now played by Joe Manganiello. Then for the girlfriend character, it would be Sadie Falk, played by Morena Baccarin. Then for Miss Senior, he would still be played by Jason Fleming, and his son, Miss Junior, would be played by Alfie Allen. Finally, for the Muscle, I decided on Blockbuster, played by Tyler Mane. Then for X-Men Apocalypse, we have JSA Ragnarok, also in 2016. Well, this is a weirder one. This is the only thing that I could think could work in terms of what we have for a movie. The reason for that is because the main villain I have is Thor, played by Nikolaj Coster-Waldau, as in the Norse god. Remember, it was a myth before Marvel got their hands on him, and in the comics, he was a villain to the JSA, so I'm going to use him here. While Apocalypse isn't actually an Egyptian god or anything like that, he is closely tied to that, so I think having an actual god as the villain kind of weirdly works in a way. He would be summoned by Wizard, Brainwave, and Vandal Savage to cause an apocalypse on Earth. The returning characters would be Hawkman, Hawkwoman, Hourman, The Flash, Starman, and Dr. Fate, this time a past version, but still played by Josh Hellman. For younger versions of characters we saw in the original JSA trilogy, we have Black Canary, played by Claire Holt, Green Lantern, played by Jesse Plemons, Mr. Terrific, played by Tom Hiddleston, and Dr. Midnight, played by Penn Badgley. Then for extra characters, I would have Magog, played by Ben Foster, Star Spangled Kid, played by Evan Peters, and Cyclone, played by Olivia Munn. They would be characters kinda in the background and wouldn't have a larger role, just showcasing these characters in some way, since this movie already has a shit ton of characters. Magog could be with the bad guys since he was originally introduced as a bad guy anyway. Star Spangled Kid could maybe eventually join the Justice Society at the end, and then Cyclone can just kind of fuck off like Psylocke did in the actual movie. We then get to the Logan counterpart, and I have the final death of Hawkman in 2017. So, here would essentially be the alleged death of Hawkman. You could make the excuse that maybe the curse only lasts until the end of time or something. And here, Hawkman and Hawkwoman are nearing the end of time itself, just to make a proper excuse to have an actual death of the character. In order to excuse the fact that Hoth Set or someone like Vandal Savage would not be the villain again, the movie could start out with Hawkman and Hawkwoman killing Hoth Set for the final time, and them realizing that that was his final life, and that they are on theirs. I feel like the character of Hector Hall would be mentioned at some point, mainly because I feel like that would be an important character to at least mention, because X-23 was a huge part of Logan, and even though she would kind of be replaced with Hawkwoman, I think a biological child of the two of them should be mentioned at some point. With the villain, it was a bit of a tough one, but I decided on a weirder one that could work as a character that would last until the end of time. Entropy, who would be voiced by Richard E. Grant. Definitely a weirder one, but I think chaos in the universe would last until the end of time, and it gives them a villain to fight. Maybe I'm pushing it, but the film ends with them vanquishing Entropy. Maybe, maybe not, who knows? It's weird character, so maybe they will, maybe they won't, but more importantly, the movie ends with them, Hawkman and Hawkwoman, dying together. That would be the main cause. Whether you have Entropy actually dying or ending or whatever is entirely, it doesn't matter. So with that, we move on. Now we're at Deadpool 2, and we have Jack Knight Starman 2 in 2018. Simply put, a sequel to the first one. Let's move on. So, with a time-traveling hero who has to stop a future threat, I decided on a lesser-known character called Space Ranger, as he has been associated with Jack Knight in the comics. I know people are already thinking, what about Rip Hunter, or even Booster Gold? Well, those characters would probably be associated with the larger DC universe and the Justice League, so it's unlikely Fox would have the rights to those characters. With that, I decided on Space Ranger, who would be played by Josh Brolin. Then for the villain, or at least the kid character who would become a villain, I decided on Courtney Whitmore, who would eventually become Stargirl. Since Fire Fist was just a regular X-Man who they decided to make a villain here, might as well get the character who would kind of be the successor to Jack Knight anyway, so when she does become a good guy, he can pass it on to her. Makes sense, right? No? Well, screw you then. It's my video, I can do what I want. She would be played by Elsie Fisher. Then for the secondary villain with Juggernaut, I decided to bring back Sportsmaster, as that was the initial Juggernaut counterpart anyway. Then for the Dark Phoenix counterpart, we have JSA Eclipse in 2019. Since Dark Phoenix Saga is a major X-Men adjacent story, I decided to go with a kind of similar character who gets the vibe of the Phoenix and just have the JSA fight with them. With that, I picked Eclipso. JSA versus Eclipso, with maybe the ISA in the background, or maybe just the wizard like Eric in the film. The team would consist of Hawkman, Hourman, The Flash, Black Canary, Green Lantern, Mr. Terrific, Star-Spangled Kid, and Dr. Midnight, with their actors returning. Then we would have Scott Shepard play Eclipso. Honestly, there isn't much to it, but then actually have this film possibly lead into the events of the first JSA film and make the timeline work properly. Unlike, the Fox X-Men timeline. I would have certain characters leaving to properly set that up as well, like Mr. Terrific wanting to focus on his civilian life for the first time rather than being a hero, hence why he isn't in the first film. Same with Star-Spangled Kid, growing up and not wanting to just be seen as a kid and leaving, as well as giving a reason for the Flash that I can't think of right now. In a post-credit scene, you can have Wildcat, Sandman, and Johnny Thunder joining the group to set up JSA in 2000. For the final X-Men film with the New Mutants, I have the final Fox JSA film, which is Infinity Inc. in 2020. New Mutants is a young team connected to X-Men, just like Infinity Inc. is to Justice Society. So I feel like this makes sense. I think it should take place sometime in the late 2000s, maybe early 2010s, to try and fit with the overall timeline. The team would consist of Fury, played by Anya Taylor-Joy, Brainwave Jr., played by Charlie Heaton, Jade, played by Maisie Williams, Obsidian, played by Ansel Elgort, and Northwind, played by Henry Zaga. The villain would be Psycho Pirate, played by John Hamm. It wouldn't be like New Mutants, where they're stuck in the hospital. It would just be a run-of-the-mill movie, but deal with their powers and being more relatable to a younger audience, dealing with being legacy heroes as well. You could have stuff with like Jade and Obsidian being the children of Green Lantern, Brainwave Jr. being the son of a villain, and all that shit. Now for a fun little bonus. I decided to include the counterpart film for Deadpool and Wolverine, which would become Starman and Hawkman in 2024, even though it would make sense to include Wildcat, since that is who Hugh Jackman played in this universe. But considering he was less prominent here than what Hawkman became, I decided on Hawkman. However, this does create some discrepancies, because by this logic, it should take place in the same universe as the DCCU and MEU, but due to how I did those films, it doesn't really work. So I don't know how this would be an actual movie. I'm just doing this as a fun bonus. Don't think about it too hard. Alright? With this, it would have Ed Skrein and Dennis Quaid returning to their respective roles. I also decided on Shade as the villain because I felt he could be like an all-powerful villain when need be. Even though he can swing between villain and anti-hero for being around for so long. He would be played by Henry Cavill. And then instead of the, TVA world, whatever the fuck it's called, I'll put it up on the screen because I can't remember it right now. It could be in the Shadowland. Boom. There you go. That's where all these heroes are stuck. Shadowland. Ha. Boom, it totally makes sense. But you don't care about all that shit. You care about the nostalgia bait. You just care about the member berries, because God knows that's the only reason this movie made any money. So, let's get to the cameos. First is the X-23 counterpart as someone closely related to one of the heroes. I decided on Hector Hall, aka Silver Scarab, played by Channing Tatum, being the biological child of the second person in the title. I thought it worked fairly well. Then for other cameos, I decided on Wonder Woman, played by Linda Carter, Steel, played by Shaquille O'Neal, Lightning Lad, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, and Power Girl, played by Alice Eve. Now I know what you guys are thinking. What about Nick Cage as Superman? Shouldn't he be here somewhere? Well, if you remember, Batman never happened, and Death of Superman never happened. So, why would an adaptation of a comic that never existed try to be made and then canceled? Especially by a director who in this universe ended up not directing a superhero adaptation. So, Nick Cage's Superman would simply never exist here. Sorry. But it is very apropos in a way, because Ryan Reynolds did try to get Nick Cage as Ghost Rider in Deadpool and Wolverine, but he declined. So, it weirdly maybe kind of works. Anyway. But that is all I have for you right now. Those would be the Fox Justice Society films. Next month, I will have the Sony films featuring DC's most popular character. You decide on which one that will be. Until then, see you next time.